The outlaw smiled as he aimed his revolver at the frightened 12-year-old boy. "Nobody moves," he shouted, "or the kid dies first." The entire town square fell silent. Marshal Harlan Creed stood frozen. His rifle was too far away. The nearest deputy had already been wounded. Mothers pulled their children behind wagons, while ranchers gripped their hats, knowing they were seconds away from witnessing a murder. Then, crack. A single rifle shot echoed across the valley. The outlaw screamed. His revolver flew from his hand before he could pull the trigger, spinning through the air and landing in the dirt nearly 30 feet away. Nobody had seen the shooter. Every face turned toward the rocky cliffs surrounding the town. Nothing, only empty ridges. The wind whispered through the dry grass. The mysterious marksman had already vanished. Some swore it had to be a soldier hiding in the hills. Others believed it was a ghost protecting the town. Only one person knew the truth, and she intended to keep it that way because the greatest shooter Red Mesa had ever known wasn't the Marshal, wasn't a bounty hunter, and certainly wasn't a famous gunslinger. She was a quiet freight clerk named Evelyn Brooks, and if everything went according to plan, no one would ever discover her secret. 4 days earlier, life in Red Mesa followed the same rhythm every morning. Merchants swept the wooden sidewalks. The blacksmith's hammer rang through the cool air. Freight wagons rolled through the town gate carrying flour, tools, and supplies from distant settlements. Inside the freight office, Evelyn Brooks carefully recorded every shipment arriving in town. She spoke softly, worked honestly, and avoided attention whenever possible. To everyone else, she looked completely ordinary, exactly as she wanted. Years ago, her grandfather had taught her lessons few people ever learned. Not how to become famous, not how to become feared, but how to stay calm when everyone else panicked. Every sunrise, he had taken her into the hills with an old rifle. She learned to judge distance without measuring it. She learned to predict the wind by watching birds glide overhead. Most importantly, she learned never to fire unless the shot truly mattered. After her grandfather passed away, Evelyn packed away the rifle and promised herself she would never use it again. Small towns had little respect for women, who outperformed men with a weapon. She preferred peace over praise. For years, that choice worked until 6 strangers arrived. They entered Red Mesa just before sunset. Dust covered their coats. Their horses looked exhausted, but their leader's eyes remained sharp. His name was Rufus Kane. Unlike ordinary outlaws, Rufus rarely raised his voice. He smiled often, and somehow that made him even more dangerous. Within days, trouble followed. A rancher's cattle disappeared. A merchant's warehouse caught fire during the night. Travelers were robbed less than a mile outside town. Nobody could prove Rufus was responsible, yet everyone believed he was Marshal Harlan. Creed wanted to arrest the gang immediately. Unfortunately, he had only 1 deputy and fewer than a dozen reliable volunteers. "If we attack without a plan," the deputy warned, "we'll lose." Harlan hated admitting it, but he agreed. Meanwhile, Evelyn noticed details nobody else seemed to see. Every evening, Rufus's men returned from different directions. One always carried fresh rope. Another smelled of blasting powder. A third came back with wet boots. Even on dry days, they weren't wandering, they were preparing. Late one afternoon, Rufus entered the freight office alone. He looked around before resting both hands on Evelyn's counter. "You keep records of every wagon?" "I do," he smiled. "Then you know exactly when valuable shipments arrive." "I only write what's delivered." Rufus leaned closer. "I admire organized people." His eyes drifted toward the locked cabinet where shipment schedules were stored. He wasn't there to buy supplies. He was collecting information. The moment he left, Evelyn hurried to the marshal's office. "They're planning something bigger." Marshal Harlan looked up. "What makes you think that?" "They're studying deliveries instead of stealing them." "Can you prove it?" She couldn't. Without proof, the marshal's hands were tied. 3 mornings later, the answer arrived. A payroll wagon carrying thousands of dollars approached the narrow canyon east of Down halfway through, an explosion shattered the silence. Huge rocks crashed onto the trail, masked riders appeared from both. Cliffs to gunfire erupted, the guards fought. Bravely, but were trapped within minutes. The payroll chest was gone, the outlaws vanished into the mountains before reinforcements could arrive. The robbery shocked everyone, but Evelyn noticed something far more frightening. The money had never been the real prize. While the town focused on chasing the stolen payroll, Rufus quietly sent 2 men to seize an abandoned signal tower overlooking the only bridge into Red Mesa. From there, they could control every wagon entering or leaving. Town food, medicine, ammunition, everything depended on that bridge. This wasn't just a robbery, it was the first move in a plan to take over the entire town. That evening, frightened residents crowded into the town hall. Arguments broke out. Some wanted to flee. Others demanded a fight. No one could agree. Evelyn slipped away unnoticed. She walked to a weathered shed standing alone behind her small house. Inside, hidden beneath an old canvas cover, rested a rifle she hadn't touched in nearly a decade. Dust coated the wooden stock. Her grandfather's initials were still carved into the side. She stared at it in silence. "If I pick you up again," she whispered, "there's no going back." Slowly, she reached forward and wrapped her hand around the rifle. The old rifle felt heavier than Evelyn remembered. For nearly 10 years, it had rested untouched beneath a layer of dust, hidden from the world and almost forgotten by its owner. She brushed the dust from the worn wooden stock, checked the barrel, and quietly loaded 5 cartridges. Outside, Red Mesa slept. Inside, Evelyn made a decision that would change her life forever. Before sunrise, she rode into the hills overlooking the bridge. From a rocky ledge, she studied the abandoned signal tower through a small brass spyglass that had belonged to her grandfather. Just as she expected, Rufus Kane's men had already occupied it. One guarded the upper window, another stood near the bridge collecting supplies. A third patrolled the hillside. They weren't waiting for travelers, they were waiting for the town to surrender. Instead of attacking, Evelyn observed them for hours. She counted their movements, noted when they changed positions, and watched how carelessly they left the tower every afternoon to collect water from a nearby spring. That evening, she returned to Marshal Harlan Creed. "I know how to take the tower," she said. The Marshal looked surprised. "You found a weakness." "They leave only one guard behind for a few minutes every afternoon." "And how do you know that?" "I watch them." "For how long?" "Long enough." The Marshal studied her face. There was a confidence in her voice that couldn't be ignored. The next afternoon, Harlan chose 4 trusted volunteers. No speeches, no celebration. Just a quiet ride through the hills. As the volunteers circled behind the ridge, Evelyn climbed alone to a higher position overlooking the tower. She rested the rifle across a flat rock. The wind shifted gently from west to east. She smiled. Perfect. The first shot shattered the rope, holding the tower's warning bell. The loud clang echoed through the valley. The lone guard rushed outside, confused. Before he could understand what had happened, the Marshal and his men surrounded him without firing a single shot. Within minutes, the signal tower belonged to Red Mesa again. The townspeople cheered, but Evelyn didn't. She knew Rufus Kane wouldn't accept defeat. Sure enough, that night smoke rose from the northern ranches. Barns burned, livestock scattered into the darkness. It wasn't revenge, it was bait. Rufus wanted the Marshal to divide his men. Instead, Evelyn quietly unfolded a map across the Marshal's desk. "He wants us to chase him north. So we don't?" "No." "Then where?" She pointed toward an old canyon. "Tomorrow he'll attack the town from here." The Marshal frowned. "How can you be certain?" "Because it's the only route that keeps the morning sun behind him." Harlan nodded slowly. He had learned to trust her instincts. At dawn, every volunteer waited silently inside the canyon. The streets of Red Mesa appeared almost deserted, exactly as Rufus hoped. An hour later, 6 riders thundered toward town. They entered, confidently, and found no resistance. Rufus smiled. "Looks like they finally ran. Then a whistle echoed through the canyon. Hidden volunteers blocked the road behind them. At the same moment, Marshal Harlan stepped into the street with his rifle raised. "It's over." "Rufus," the outlaw laughed. "You really think you've trapped me?" He drew his revolver and fired. The bullet struck a wagon wheel. Panic spread instantly. His gang opened fire from every direction. People dove behind barrels and fences. Amid the chaos, Rufus mounted his horse and raced toward the eastern trail. If he escaped now, he would return with even more outlaws. Evelyn climbed onto the rooftop of the great office. She steadied the rifle. The distance was enormous. The target was moving. She didn't aim at Rufus. She aimed just ahead of his horse. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck a thick tree branch hanging above the trail. The branch snapped and crashed onto the narrow path. Rufus's horse reared to avoid it, throwing him hard onto the ground. Before he could stand, Marshal Harlan and 2 volunteers reached him. The outlaw looked from the broken branch to the rooftop. For the first time, he saw Evelyn holding the rifle, so he muttered, "It was you, Evelyn." Lowered the weapon. "I never wanted anyone to know." Rufus gave a bitter smile. "Maybe that's what made you impossible to beat." With their leader captured, the remaining outlaws surrendered one after another. By sunset, Red Mesa was safe again. Word of the mysterious riflewoman spread across the frontier. Travelers invented impossible stories. Some claimed she could split a coin in midair. Others insisted she could hit a target without even looking. Whenever someone asked Evelyn if the stories were true, she simply smiled and returned to her work at the freight office. One afternoon, Marshal Harlan walked inside carrying the old rifle. "You should keep this where people can see it," he said. Evelyn gently shook her head. "It isn't. The rifle people should remember." "What should they remember?" "That courage isn't about being the loudest person in the room." The marshal smiled. "Then what is it?" "It's choosing to stand up when everyone else is too afraid." The rifle went back into its case. Life in Red Mesa slowly returned to normal. The wagons rolled through town once again. Children played in the streets. The bridge stayed open. And every now and then, when the wind echoed across the hills, people remembered the day a single unseen shot had saved an entire town. Most never discovered who fired it. Those who did understood something even more important. Heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they quietly live next door, waiting for the moment when doing the right thing matters more than staying unnoticed.